I'm here to talk about content that resonates with underrepresented audiences. And the first thing I want to explain is why me. So I have a lot of diversity, equity, and inclusion experience. I was most recently and continue to be the lead researcher on the Being Seen report, which delved into how underrepresented audiences want to be portrayed on the screen. I'm multiracial, and I've worked as an evaluator for several funds which can't be named on web series funding. So I've been doing that for years. So I'm very familiar with the intersection between web series content, diversity and inclusion, and underrepresented audiences. So, first question is, what is an underrepresented audience? Many people talk about them as if it's very clear. A lot of the funders put them into four main buckets: Black, racialized, 2S LGBTQIA+, and people with disabilities. I'm not going to talk about Indigenous because they are advocating to be dealt with separately and not as part of the underrepresented community. But the other thing to consider is underrepresented really is everyone who is not in the mainstream. And that can be many other things: immigration status, socioeconomic status, your living situation, your religion. There are many people who are not being seen. There's the intersectionality between these different groups. So if you are Black and queer, your life experience is going to be different than if you were Black and straight, for example. So with the Being Seen report, it came out a year and a half ago. So I've been flogging this at conferences, panels, and many of you may be familiar with it. We've got funders of it here. But it was researched with over 400 people in the industry and members of the general public to find out what they thought about their representation, the lack of representation, how they want to be portrayed, and the stories that they want to see. The big takeaway, big picture, is that they want stories that reflect their world and their experiences, and that what they're seeing isn't that. They want more complexity. Complexity of characters, complexity of their community, so that people understand that these communities are incredibly diverse even within themselves. The big message was no more trauma stories. If you were here for the You're My Hero discussion, that's what he was talking about. Tired of seeing themselves only as what some call trauma porn, where the able-bodied audience, for example, feels better by watching the trauma stories. But they want to see joy, they want to see themselves in comedies, westerns, sci-fi, everything where everybody else is, they want to be there too. Oh, and one last thing, if you want to learn more about the communities, if you want to learn more about the reports, they're at beingseen.ca. I always forget to send people off there. So a big discussion throughout the research was who can tell stories from underrepresented communities? Is it limited to those people from those communities? And we don't set limits. We don't set limits on creativity. What we ask through the research is that you consider, are you the right person to tell the story? Are you from the community? Do you have a connection to the community? Sometimes being outside of a community is a completely legitimate perspective on a story. But why are you doing it? Are you doing it because it's trendy and maybe you think you can make money on this story? Probably the wrong reason. But if there is a connection, then will you do the work? The other consideration is the issue of equity. There are people from those communities who have not had the opportunities to tell the stories. So maybe you shouldn't be telling the story, but helping somebody else to tell the story. And there's a lot of opportunities, and I'll get into those in a minute, for experienced, white, able-bodied, straight creators and producers to work with less experienced, underrepresented, and help them to tell their stories. And those can be some really terrific partnerships. But it's also, we're not directing all of this just at white producers. This is asking everybody, regardless of their position, regardless of their identity, to think about, have they done the work to be authentic and representative? Clement Virgo, a Black director who last year released the film Brother, he said he had to do authenticity work because as a Canadian-born Jamaican man, he was telling the story of a Jamaican woman immigrant who brought her sons to Canada. He did not have that experience, so he had to do work to make sure it was authentic. So now I'm going to talk about a few examples, and these may be shows that you're familiar with, but I'm going to talk about them from the perspective of the audience. And they're Canadian web series because that's what I know best. So we talked about You're My Hero earlier today, so I'm going to go over this one briefly. The lead is a man in his 20s with cerebral palsy, and he's the creative vision. But he worked with other people who were able-bodied to help him get that creative vision out there, including Long Hope, which is an experienced television production company. Gay Mean Girls, a story of 2S LGBTQIA plus Asian high school students figuring out their identities, being teenagers, but also being queer. It reached into a very untapped market, which is racialized and queer. And when you can find one of those traditionally niche audiences and provide them with the content they're looking for, they will be huge fans. And they will help spread the message. So, and female and non-binary queer is a very much dedicated fan base when they find content. But again, it's not just for queer Asian high school students. It has a much wider reach than that. And almost everybody on this team was queer and Asian, but the creator, Hei-Shi Zhang, partnered with a non-Asian white producer, Maddie Fell. And then everybody else that they put together on the team were Asian and mostly women. Womb envy, there's going to be a panel on this tomorrow. Gay man has sympathetic pregnancy symptoms, falls in love with the blind Lamaze coach. It was intentionally made for both the gay and the disabled communities. One of the things that I think is really interesting about this is that it shows a very diverse social mix. So people who, it's Black, racialized and white, disabled and able-bodied, queer and straight, and they're all mixing in that story. And one of the things that people told us in the research is that that's their life, is to have a very diverse social mix, and that's not what they're seeing. They tend to see stories being all of one thing, or maybe two things. So this is both a reflection of real life and the kind of stories that people want, but it also, by covering a number of different communities, gives you more potential, a broader potential audience. Streams flow from a river. It's about a dysfunctional Chinese-Canadian family stuck in a snowstorm in rural Alberta. I often hear, oh, but I don't have to think about diversity for my story because it takes place in a small town. Or it takes place in a different, not in Ontario or BC. And that reflects people thinking about Canada in a way that it hasn't been in decades. There is racial diversity across the country. This is just one example. To help them pitch the story to broadcasters who frequently, and platforms who frequently also think that Canada hasn't changed in 50 years. They went into the demographics and they found reports to demonstrate that, yes, there are audiences in rural Alberta that are racialized who are looking for content. So if you are telling a story like that, I would recommend getting the data. StatsCan has it. You can pull it up. There's a Being Counted is the first of its kind study on race-based audience survey that shows what people are looking for. And you can, because you're going to have to actually prove that these audiences are there, but they are. It's also a story, even though it's about a Chinese-Canadian family, it's one that immigrant families from all backgrounds can relate to. And I think that's another ongoing theme. Think about your audience as bigger than just the specific community that you're showcasing. Ainara's bookshelf, I wanted to talk about not just scripted. So Ainara is a young Black woman who talks about books by and about underrepresented communities, and it came from her Instagram account. There are a lot of Black and racialized parents looking for positive role models for their kids, and this addresses it. There are also teachers looking for content like this and looking for those kinds of books. But there are also white parents who are looking for this kind of content because their kids are living in diverse communities. So they don't want to show their kids just white content. And one of the reports we did was specifically on children's media, and we had parents telling us there's just not enough positive role modeling, and this is something we want to see. Virgins is a web series about a community that we never hear from. I think the only East African story I can think of was years ago. There was a Somali gang miniseries, and that's it. So they produced this for the East African community to tell the story of women in their 20s trying to navigate the big city while also balancing traditional cultural values. That's a common second-generation experience. In fact, I'm going to quote from CMF's Now and Next. Aiden Abebe said that she was surprised and grateful that the show appeals to many people outside the East African communities. And Reem, she wrote that. So this is a very common story about women balancing faith, culture, and modern life, and we're not seeing those stories, and I think that has a great appeal to a lot of people. Next Stop is an anthology comedy series about young Black Torontonians. In the first season, it was self-financed by Jabari Weeks, Techaona Tapumbwa, and Phil Whitmer, based on their lived experiences. It was very low budget and self-funded and put on YouTube, where they were able to demonstrate that there was an audience. And they were also able to create the content without anybody trying to say, you've got to tone it down, make it less specific. And it still found an audience. And then for the second season, Scarborough Pictures came on as producer. It moved to CBC Gem, bigger budget. But they had proven that the concepts and the stories worked, so they didn't have to do anything different other than, some more actors and different, being able to put some more money into it. But it appeals not just to, they're very specific Black Scarborough, not even Black Toronto, but Scarborough stories. But they are of appeal to 20-somethings in urban centers. They are in many ways sort of universal stories, while at the same time being very specific. Frick, I Love Nature. This is, again, I want to say that it's about not just scripted. This is a nature series. It's hosted by Filipino-Canadian Gordy Lucius, and it's shot in Alberta. It's hilarious, but there's so little Filipino representation, and this is something that I think is going to appeal not just to lovers of nature series, but the Filipino community. The last one I want to talk about is the 410. It came out a few years ago, and it's about a drug smuggling ring in the Indo-Canadian community in Brampton. When we did the research a few years later, the South Asian participants frequently cited it as an example of a show where they felt seen, because it was, even if they weren't from the Indo-Canadian community in Brampton, it was a rare example of South Asian representation. It also got profile within the community because that central character hid her drugs within the prayer room in the house, and that hit ethnic media as a sign of disrespect, which is kind of the point in the story. But it got wider profile within the community because of that. I'm not suggesting piss off your community as a strategy, but your community can become a partner. If you find a hook into that community, they will spread the word for you. Last points, remember that your audience is bigger than the community featured in your story, because so many other communities can relate on different levels. Look for untold stories, because there's so many of them out there, and different ways of telling stories. Don't think about it as the traditional way that stories have been told. Underrepresented communities are actively looking for stories that reflect them and represent them, and they can become your partners in promoting the show. And authenticity resonates. It makes a difference.